So for today, we shall embark on yet another day master. And according to the chart, you would have guessed that today will be on the Geng metal. And so the Geng metal represents, of course, the Yang metal, and the metal represents the element that can heal. And so when wood gives life, the metal takes it away. Therefore here, oh, your Geng Shen, whoa, scary. All right, pure metal. Do you have Ting Fire in your chart, Malika? You better say you do. All right. Therefore here, the Geng metal represents the sword. The Geng metal, of course, is the Yang metal. And so essentially, it is the essence of the blade. And so with it, we consider that metal people better be careful when you drive on the road, because your taste for speed makes you vulnerable to accidents. Because when metal clashes with wood, that denotes a kind of an accident clash as well, especially car related or automobile related. Therefore, here as we refer to the Geng Metal Day Master, what they are known for. Now, metal is known for what we consider to be brotherhood, or well, I mean the word brotherhood just means fraternity. Therefore, indicating that metal is also the symbol for justice. And so the image of a Geng metal or Yang metal is the warrior that fights for justice, the warrior that is guided by an internal moral compass, a sense of what is right or wrong. Therefore, loyalty, righteousness would be the hallmark of the Yang metal. And so, essentially, one of the Fui Kong stars will be here, which is, of course, the Geng metal represents that warrior tendency. So, resilient and, of course, gritty. Therefore, you can find that there are many Geng metal that can rise to the top. So, the need for speed, the need for immediate decision, that would be the capability of the Geng metal. So decisiveness, action-oriented, definitely. So the more metal that you have, the more impatient you are. The 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 more time-oriented you are. That means speed is of the essence, and therefore you are driven, you are very, very competitive. And so with that, we come into analyzing into what are the requirements for the Yang metal. Now again, you do find this to be a hallmark of many Yang elements. We find that the Jia wood is stubborn. We also find that the Wu earth is stubborn. Ping fire is also about it. And needless to say, we also find the Geng metal to be stubborn as well. Maybe the one Yang element that is not so stubborn and flexible, that would be the Ren water. And so here, yet another character that is stubborn, that is unwavering, and so impulsive and hasty. So immediately when you think of Geng metal, what would be the first useful god that comes to mind? What would be the first useful god? The first useful god for all Geng metal will be the Ting fire, correct? Therefore, we would consider that all Geng metal day masters need to go through the baptism of fire. And therefore, the sooner or the earlier they meet the Ting fire, the better it is. Both fire, but Ting fire would be the most important one. For metal to be useful, metal must be forged, and fire forges the metal, making it useful. And so immediately, when you look into Geng metal, we would want to see Ting fire. We want to see the direct officer. And to see the direct officer indicates that Geng metal would be suitable for employment. Geng metal would be suitable for structured work. And employers would welcome the Geng metal because the Geng metal is execution. So usually we would consider sometimes in just a overgeneralized statement. Some people say that there are two types of employees, there are two types of workers, those who know how to talk and those who know how to do. And so the Keng metal are the ones who know how to do. And so with Keng elements in their chart, they value execution, they want results, they want speed, because that is the axe, that is a sword. Therefore, Keng metal calls for action. And to be useful, they need Ting fire. In the absence of this fire, if Ting fire becomes the void god, then other elements like water will make it rust. So metal will drown it, and therefore an earth will cover it. And wood, of course, will be too strong, and the metal cannot. A, a blunt a blunt sword cannot chop down the tree. A lump of metal is of no use, and therefore, fire is an important ingredient. So if you do look into the useful god chart, you would find that fire would be one element. Ting fire most of the time, not every month, but most of the time. So there are just one or two occasions where Ting fire is not needed to be a useful god, not needed, but very rare, very rare. And even if you do say that, you do find that when Ting fire is not the useful god, the Ping fire will take its place, so to speak. All right, so here we do see that fire definitely will be an important one. So let's go through the particular Keng metal with lots of water. The chart cries is depression. Therefore, mental health. Mental health will be the problem for metal with too much water because it becomes rotting metal. It becomes sinking metal. That is correct. All right. So very quickly, these are the key characteristics of a Geng Metal Day Master. And of course, now let's take a look into the paradox, the yin and the yang. The yin and the yang. So the thing about metal, now metal doesn't produce water. Huh? Metal doesn't produce water. But of course, water is the output stuff. And therefore, in a way, Geng metal attracts water, attracts. Therefore, metal represents the power of attraction. And of course, between the Geng metal and the Sin metal, which one is born to attract? Which one will be basically the metal that shines with value? That would be the Sin. That would be the Sin. So in the yin and yang of metal, Geng metal attracts, but not the way like a diamond. It doesn't attract like a diamond. Perhaps more like a magnet. Well, I mean, a magnet can attract metal. So the metal represents that kind of attraction, that kind of raw power, that kind of so-called that kind of ability to then attract. That is the do and die. Therefore, what draws people to the Geng metal would represent the attraction to stability, attraction to raw power. Therefore, it would be somewhat like the knight in the shining armor. And so, Geng metal is one of those never give up. It becomes the weapon. So, employers, of course, would welcome a Geng metal because they represent the warriors in the company. They are team players because metal denotes brotherhood. Of course, like I said, brotherhood is not gender specific, but it just represents fraternity. Team player, fraternity, that would be the hallmark of Geng metal. They are very willing to work long hours and they are driven to accomplish tasks as much as they can. Therefore, definitely very competitive, very decisive, action oriented. That will be it. But of course, that will come to a requirement. The requirement that it has been forged with fire. not to be stubborn. Right. So now, as we look on into the various season, as we also look into what are the key uh, industries. So, Keng metal represents justice. Therefore, with metal element in their chart, the legal profession tends to be it. Now, maybe the sin metal might be better to be lawyers because lawyers needs to talk very well, and the gift of the gap that would belong to the sin metal. Ah, the earth symbol is rooster, and we always consider that roosters are the people who talk a lot, the tendency to talk a lot. Therefore, the ability to talk is definitely needed for those in litigation, for lawyers. And of course, in the police, military, that will be the more of the yang metal, so to speak. Automobile and also metal related industries, those are simple. Anything that represents mobility, transportation, mechanics, toughness control would be within the scope of metal. So engineering, research, and anything that is precise, anything that needs strong momentum. And so, of course, the natural season for metal will be autumn. And so, as they are autumn, then we'll find that, of course, metal will be most prosperous. And so, since metal is most prosperous, therefore, they would welcome wood. They are able to welcome wood because they're able to chop down the wood. And of course, they're able to be forged by fire. Therefore, indicating that the Keng metal welcomes officer as they welcome control. So metal doesn't work well with water. It doesn't work well. And therefore, during the season of winter, when it's cold, and so a cold, dark metal will not be used. And therefore, fire will become the needed element. So when we look into the Keng metal, metal, we can see that during the winter months, if you look into the schedule, during the winter months, both fire, both fire, the Ting fire and the Ping fire will be present in the red month, in the ox month, and also on the pig month. So therefore, all these winter months, both the fire elements will be required. And so when comes spring, when metal is overwhelmingly strong. And so therefore this is where we do find that for the month of the tiger, especially in the spring, we find that if you look into the schedule, now normally when we look into the original schedule, useful gods, uh, minimum one, usually two, sometimes three, and very rarely you find five. And this will be the rare occasion where there are five useful gods. There's five useful gods in a month of the tiger for the Keng metal. So this indicates that metal will be at its weakest point and would be needed with many useful gods in order to for it to be used. And when it comes to summer, summer will be where we find fire to be able to metal. Therefore, it becomes tremendously very, very useful. And so, again, as we now come to our advanced part, we now blend in the career with the useful gods because the useful gods will be the strongest clue as into whether or not the day master will prosper or otherwise. And so, in all simplicity, when you look into Keng metal, immediately we want the activation. We want the activation. Now, which Keng metal sits on fire? And usually the Geng metal that sits on fire, especially for female, because female, the fire represents officer, represents husband. Therefore, we may say that sometimes the activation may be marriage itself. Therefore, depending on where that metal resides. And so between the Ping fire and the Ting fire, the Ting fire would then be most ideal, most ideal. And if not, then of course the Ping fire will do its magic here all the same. Now, besides that, we also find earth element. So we find that the useful gods from occasions to occasions, we may find that the Wu Earth may be producing. Actually, only one time, in the month of the tiger. Therefore, when Earth is abundant will then bury the metal. And therefore, when we see that Earth, if you refer to Earth burying metal, Earth burying metal is akin to somebody being bogged down in research data gathering that they fail at. Because Earth producing metal is the slowest. So it takes centuries for Earth to produce metal. And therefore, and that metal can be pressured under the Earth. More so for Wu Earth compared to the G Earth, compared to the G Earth. Therefore, the Wu Earth represents the indirect resource. Indirect resource. Okay, so for water, so for some form of water, so water can be able to control, can be a regulating temperature, especially during summer. So if fire is overwhelming, so fire is overwhelming, it may be where water is needed. But still a Keng metal without water can still be powerful. But once they are without water, they are without output. Therefore, they might struggle in order to express themselves. And so now let's come into the purpose of life. Wood exists to give life. The fire exists to shine, to provide guidance. And therefore, earth, of course, will be the center, to provide resources. And now metal, of course, is born to cut wood. So metal is created in order to control or to chop down wood. So therefore, for the Keng metal, we do find that among the richest, Keng metal could be amongst them. But of course, the thing about wood is that wood is finite. Wood is finite. Unlike rainwater, rainwater will prosper far greater economically because to a rainwater, fire is infinite. Therefore, wealth is infinite. But here we do see that metal, and when metal chops down the wood, it becomes quite finite. Therefore, that would be it as well. And therefore, for Keng metal, uh, the ability to chop wood makes it useful. The ability to so this wealth area of controlling is more about managing, closing, structuring, and that is all about the tool of action. So a metal that is not used collects rust. Therefore, if a metal is a tool that is not being used, the tool will be rusty. The tool will be able to not work will not continue. Therefore, that would be the case where the motivation for a Keng metal. So, what is the motivation for a Keng metal? Clear, tangible goals. Clear, tangible goals. So the one way to motivate a Geng Metal Day Master is to point them towards the tree that you want them to chop. You can just point to a tree and say, okay, now that's the tree, and I want you to chop it down. And so Geng Metal does require direction. They do require direction. They do require that focus, the focus on the job. Now, wood metal likes to meet another metal. Wood metal likes to meet another metal. Now, the thing about metal people, uh, they love to argue. They love to argue. Metal tends to talk. They tend to refine their capabilities by measuring against. Therefore, they would welcome a challenge. They would welcome competition. Therefore, they are not too afraid of that. So this would be the summary of all the elements that we. And so as we go along, leaves falling off trees yeah, in a way, correct. Wait, that is correct. So that's the symbolism for the metal, chopping up the wood. Okay, so now as you go through each and every one of them, let's explore what are the elements that the Geng metal recognizes and those that they don't. And so in the first instance, we refer to the direct resource. So the direct resource will be the GF. And so if the GF or the direct resource is your structure, is your structure. And of course, direct resource is proper resource. And having GF as a resource is to have lots and lots of resources because Earth is full of resources. Therefore, Geng metal with direct resource structure can be, of course, academic scientists can do research work very, very well. And therefore, direct resource people, of course, are very academically inclined, very honest, and they're very idealistic. Idealistic. And therefore, if there are evidence of eating God and serving killing, therefore that will be tremendously very useful. And of course, intelligence style elegance will then bring them to become quite the artists. Now, if GF is too strong, then it becomes buried as it is. And we take a look into now the Geng metal with indirect resource. Indirect resource means alternate knowledge, unconventional knowledge. And unconventional knowledge, of course, would include things that are outside the box. And so we consider those who are interested in metaphysics, interested in data analysis, interested in forensic analysis. And therefore, they are very suitable for some of the job, which of course will then be indirect or unconventional wisdom. Now, once they have eating God, the eating God for the Geng Day Master will then be the Ren. Therefore, here we see that the eating God, being the Ren water, can combine with the Ting Fai, with the Ting Fai, with the direct officer. Therefore, here usually the Ren water output will then be in terms of wisdom, because Ren water represents wisdom. Water represents wisdom, and so having Ren water, wisdom as your eating God, would then make a Geng metal very capable, of course, to be in industries that requires this form of generating knowledge or wisdom, writing, teaching, translation, literature. So that would be looking into Geng Day Master with Ren. Now between the Ren and the Geng, usually metal in early morning. attracts due, attracts due. And therefore, between eating God and hurting officer, we would find that the tendency is for a preference. Which of these would be the more preferable? The Kueh water. Kueh water is the more typical type of structure. Therefore, making Keng metal having greater propensity to be the hurting officer. To be the hurting officer. And the hurting officer is, of course, also ones that make excellent lawyers, politicians, because they go against the convention. And the purpose of having officer is for officer to produce wealth. So in the absence of wealth, we may then see that these talented artists that would be destined to be poor. And of course, as we look into the direct officer, this is where we will come to the point uh, where Keng metal is Keng metal people need the Ting fire. And the Ting fire, of course, means to comply or to be obedient to the law. Therefore, direct officer is the useful god all the time for Geng Metal Day Master. So if you see Geng Metal, you need to see direct officer. So manifest. Therefore, one has to manifest direct officer in the chart. Direct officer. So what does this mean? How do we manifest? What happens if you meet a Geng Metal that is self-employed? What happens if you meet a Geng Metal that is self-employed? And how do we advise a self-employed entrepreneur to have direct officer? Well, self-employed people can form a company, they can establish a company, and within the company, they can always give themselves a proper title. They can give themselves a proper title. And for, let's say, for example, Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett is Run Water. Now, Run Water doesn't welcome direct officer. What is the direct officer for a Run Water? The direct officer for a Run Water would be G-Earth. That's right. And G-Earth contaminates water. And so it becomes mud. So that's where Run Water Day Masters do not enjoy being employed. The one thing that Run Water tends to resign or to quit is if they have to deal with stupid bosses. And therefore, sometimes when Run Water feels that their bosses are not respected, they don't welcome. And so, what advice can we then give for a Run Water that is employed? That is employed. Because Run Water prefers 7 killing. So Run Water prefers 7. Because 7 killing is the Wu Earth. The Wu Earth is the one that it welcomes. Correct. Therefore, for Run Water employees, you give them improper title. You give them improper title. Sometimes in organizations, proper title, of course, will then come with very fanciful, vice president of the general manager's office. So proper title will be something you give to the Keng Metal. You are Keng Metal employees, you give them proper titles. We got Run Water employees, you give them improper titles. So improper titles are usually vague. That if you put them into a name card, people will still need to ask questions. What does this title mean? So what does it do? Let's say if you're the vice president of the CEO's office, and when you look at this name card, it's like, wow. So tell me again, what do you do? Therefore, in a way, I do find that Warren Buffett does have an improper job title in the company that he works for. So that's where we find how to manifest direct officer or how to avoid the direct officer being manifested in this hazy type of regulation. So coming back to the Keng metal, proper, make it proper, make it very official, because this is where the Keng metal will they will welcome that kind of a military structure. Because way back into the ancient days, Keng metals are the warriors, they are the soldiers. Therefore, they are excellent team leaders in the military structure. Therefore, give them the hierarchy, give them the bureaucracy, and they would prosper in a regulated industry. Therefore, that's where we do consider that direct officers are where there are strict adherence to regulations, impartiality, and so on. So that's where we can manifest, or that's where we can say use think fire. So if they need think fire, use think fire for the Keng metal, and then those are the things that will forge them into being useful. So at the end of the day, for the Keng metal, you need to point out where the wood is and tell them to go and chop those wood, so to speak. So if they have a 7 killing structure, still not bad, no? Still not bad, no? So it's not a negative star. It's not a negative star. Then you also find, you also find that the yang fire can also become useful. In fact, yang fire is the useful god for many many months on the schedule of a useful god as well. Therefore, it brings warmth to the chart. But of course, 7 killing are those jobs that would then be more on the risky side whenever possible. Definitely wood. And so, metal with wood side by side will be among the richest. And so, direct wealth will be the yeet wood. Now, between yang wood and yeet wood, between chak wood and yeet wood, which of these two would be preferable? What type of wood would be preferable? Okay, Keng combines with the yeet wood, isn't it? Therefore, there's a combination. So there's a combination. Now, when Keng combines with yeet, what does it produce? What does the combination produces? What does metal and Keng metal and yeet wood combines? What does it produce? Mistaken, it produces metal, isn't it? So it produces rival. It produces. So the axe is born to chop the chia, because combination with yeet wood uh, makes it harder to cut. There is. So this is what it means potential entanglement. Because the Keng wants to combine with the yeet wood, but the combination produces metal. So metal becomes the entangled. So when it's direct wealth, of course, it would be employment. It would be employment. But of course, in this case, the entanglement may also means rock wealth, because metal here can be the rock wealth start coming. So the indirect is the one. Therefore, this Yang, so therefore this Geng Metal Day Master would want to have the proper structure, but it becomes a natural entrepreneur. So yes, it would welcome direct officer, it would welcome a structured environment, but somehow the financial reward needs to be indirect by nature. So we welcome indirect. All right, now as we come on into the metal, does metal likes to see another metal? Does metal like to see another? Huh? That would be the question. Not really, huh? Not really. The metal versus metal is considered to be a frenemy. Now, frenemy, of course, is a contemporary term to mean friend and enemy. So at the end of the day, it depends. Now, usually when you look into how some societies are formed, a sword will welcome another sword when they encounter an outside enemy. Because in order to defend your village, in order to defend your city, the more swords you have, the more soldiers that you put to the field, the better you are, the safety in numbers. And therefore, Geng Metal welcome metal. They welcome metal when they need to fight against an outside enemy. But during peacetime, when there are no external threat, now they will turn against each other. They will fight against each other. Therefore, civil war, therefore, infighting becomes together. And so for Geng Metal, if ever there is an advice, should I form partnership? Should I work together in a joint venture? Huh? Can I benefit from partners? The answer is yes, but always have a finite. Always have a finite term. The problem more often than not, is that when friends come together to do business, when people join partnership to do business, the problem with our concept of business is that we form a company, and a company will comprise of shareholders. And shareholders, equity, has no expiry date. And because they have no expiry date, 6 years down the road, when misunderstanding took place, the civil war begins. And now they will quarrel among each other. They will go to court and fight against each other. So if there is such a concept where the separate shareholders agreement are signed and the agreement is finite, and therefore a finite shareholders agreement indicates that by the end of a fixed number of years, usually I would recommend 3 plus 3. That means 3 plus 3 is very easy, or just 3. Very simple. Or maybe longest is 6. Don't go more than 6. So meaning to say that if a Geng Day Master comes to you and say, hey, I have good brothers, I have good sisters. These are my friends. We have gone through fire in our lives, and we would like to do business together. Can we do business together? Yes, 6 years. And at the end of 6 years, the company will automatically dissolve. And if you're still talking to each other after 6 years, if you're still holding hands and still have a meal together after 6 years, then you may continue, possibly indefinite. But at the end of 6 years, if you are already at the verge of killing each other, then you'll be grateful that the business has now come automatically to an end. So there's no necessity for you to resort to legal actions or any other actions that can mutually disrupt each other's wealth. All right, therefore, this will be for the Geng Metal. They are in a state of frenemy because they are swords. A soldier is only useful at war time, when times of war. But during the times of peace, we may then find that these soldiers are restless, and therefore the tendency for turning against each other will be there. Because the thing about Geng Metal is that they are impatient. They need to see action fast. And a sense of justice indicates that if they perceive anyone not pulling their weight, anyone not a team player, then they will turn against them. So for Rockwell, that represents the sin metal. So indicating the sin metal, of course, now the question is that uh, can the Rockwell rob the wealth of a Keng metal? Yes, they can. Because the thing about the Rockwell is that, again, they also play the role of a frenemy. The frenemy concept indicates that the Keng metal can welcome the skill sets of the Rockwell, but also to find that sometimes they would lose it out as well. Therefore, this would be indicating that when meeting direct wealth, when meeting the direct wealth indicates potential financial trouble and loss of wealth into this particular life. Right. So for these are some of the key manifestation that we have. So very quickly, I think it's quite long, and let's just run through what would be the auspicious stars for the Kengmen. The ox, we inside the ox is also the metal trinity and the goat. So therefore, this represents the noble people, highly auspicious. And inside the snake, we can also find fire, which is Ting fire on the outside, Ping fire on the inside. So this represents the academics. And of course, the Keng Chen is a Fui Kong. It's a Fui Kong together with Keng Shi as well. Therefore, with Fukong star represents commander star, tremendously very, very, and combined together with Earth Tiger would be also very, very good. So all right, therefore these are some of the useful combination that we can pair them together. On now, there are so many rules, and I will find difficult now if you have a Ren riding dragon back structure. This is one of those very difficult to identify, very rare to find where we have the Ren. No, Diogo, not necessary, because inside the horse is the useful god that the Keng metal needs. Therefore, not necessary. In fact, it's very good. It's got to be very good. Okay, so now let's come into the six blades. What are the six blades that you have? Keng Zhi, therefore, Keng Zhi is now going to be sitting on. So there's a Keng Day Master sitting on the rat. And the red represents the water, and of course on the surface on the Kui water. So Kui water represents the hurting officer, and therefore Keng represents the Chat, which is whole, to which of course the talents will be not immediately visible. And so this sword is sunken, indicating that they are deep in their intellectual. Because water represents wisdom. Water represents intellect. Therefore, a sunken sword is one that would excel behind the scene. So the career path for a sunken sword will be one that has the hidden intelligence and expressive potential hurting itself. And the red represents also the salty pool star. Therefore, salty pool, of course, represents a certain sensual perversion at potential time. And so the element that is often needed most is, of course, fire. Therefore, the useful element is the kind of a fire. And so they are not the typical employee for conventional role. So their fields lies into something hidden, something hidden. So secret service, research, investigation. So these are some of the kind of path that the Keng can pursue, the sunken. Next, we look into Keng Yin, which is of course the metal tiger. So the metal tiger is one sitting on seven, is one. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Because here the Keng represents a seven killing, right? It represents a seven killing. And so essentially, of course, the tiger contains the Jiawut, which is your wealth. And inside will also be where you can find the Ting fire that comes in as well, that represents your seven. So therefore here when it sits on all the indirect, all the three indirect stars. Of course, in this indirect, the Keng Yin represents the X in the forest. Now, even though when I say indirect, we're having all three of them, somewhat gives you a sense very close to the other element that we consider. Now, what do we have? What element do we have today? Today we have the yeast. So the yeast represents the three precious. The yeast represents the three precious, and therefore the Keng Yin would then be the pillar that is also sitting on the tree, but then all three are the indirect so-called element, the officer star, the wealth star, and the resource star that comes into it. It's a good pillar. Is it a good pillar in the luck pillar? It's a very volatile pillar. It's a volatile pillar. But of course, we need to see who are you. Who are you to meet such a very? It's a very because you're gonna have seven killing inside, with the indirect resource as well. Therefore, it's quite a very volatile luck. Quite a very volatile pillar that will require you to utilize your indirect resource to make money by taking a lot of risk. Therefore, normally this pillar indicates when it comes in, the person's level of risk will elevate. The person will find itself uh, becoming, that means things are moving faster. When things are moving faster, things changes very quickly. So that is why we consider this to be act swiftly, thrive on challenges, constantly on the combat mode. So meeting this on a luck pillar would then represents that it's a war period. This will be also a symbol for war. So therefore for Kueh water, it represents so your Kueh water, so it represents the direct wealth. Represents the direct wealth, represents your direct officer. So you might be then meeting your three precious. Is it? All right. Therefore, it could be good, but still, you are on a combat mode. Correct. Therefore, Keng Yin is one of leadership and pioneering. Therefore, it is quite a very strong volatile pillar. Most of the Keng is. Let's come into the Keng Chen. The Keng Chen, of course, is a Fui Kong star. Now, Fui Kong again are commander stars. Many CEOs, many key leaders and celebrities in the world are Fui Kong. You can say that the world is controlled by the Fui Kongs, because Fui Kongs are the pillar that can rise to the top, a pillar that survive, hard to kill. And therefore, here we find that the Keng Chen will then, of course, sits on the resource, wealth, and of course, hurting officer. And therefore, indicating that they are very disciplined, they are very organized, and of course, they are very, very focused in the. And so essentially, this is the case where the one thing is they go for long. They're here to build enduring legacies. And so Uh, and so here we find that commander stars such as this that rise to the top normally represents strategic leaders who can. And now we find Keng. Now immediately Keng Wu sits on Ting fire. As he sits on Ting fire, it becomes, of course, having it sitting on its useful god. And sitting on its useful god is now when you do look at when you do look into the schedule for the useful god, you will find that the schedule does not recommend Ting fire in the month of the dog. And one reason why Ting fire is not recommended in the month of the dog is because it comes with its own Ting fire. And therefore here we do find that this so-called former Prime Minister of the UK, being known as the Iron Lady. So this Iron Lady, her nickname for Iron Lady is very apt because she is an Iron Lady in her nature of. Therefore, sitting on a Ting fire would give her the immense energy that can be forged. Therefore, she can be very, very sharp as she has already that Ting fire forged in her nature, in a particular nature. And so this is how we can consider. And fire is abundant in her chart. Fire is very much abundant in the chart. Together with it. Therefore, this represents the sword of fire. So the sword of fire is the nickname given for Geng Day Masters. And because she sits on direct officer, so sitting on direct officer represents one that wields on authority. As they wield authority, they make excellent commanders. And the one important element is, of course, do not put them into an unstructured and undisciplined environment. By putting them, then this would make them lost, make them not be able to execute their decision. So this may mean that they might not be used. So, now here comes the Keng Shen. Keng Shen is blunt metal. It's a blunt metal. Is so-called it's called metal sitting on metal. As it is metal sitting on metal, it is it can be quite crude. It can be quite crude. It can be quite blunt. It can have and definitely it has very bad table manners, and therefore not able to socialize very well, not able to communicate. And then usually, of course, Keng Shen is the typical image for gangsterism, to be uncivilized, crude gangsters. But of course, the moment we find that the monkey is baptized in fire, then it becomes as sharp as a sword. And then it becomes tremendously very useful. So this is where if it is not baptized by fire, it can be quite an unadaptable pillar, very difficult to change because they are very, very stubborn and they're very, very blunt. But once they are baptized by fire, then they would then pursue themselves to be a specialist, to be a master because they are tremendously very focused. And so of all the 6 Keng Day Master, Keng Shen needs Ting Fire the most. Because inside the monkey is water. Inside the monkey is water. So it's already cold. It's already cold. And therefore more fire would be needed. And sometimes the fire may repel because of the water in the jar. Because earth weakens fire. Water, of course, clash with fire. Therefore, Keng Shen needs fire. They need the fire, but sometimes their innate characteristics reject the fire, therefore making it hard to teach, hard to teach, hard to teach, hard to teach, hard to accept. Therefore, making them sometimes very suspicious of change, because they are suspicious of change. So that's why they are most unadaptable. But once they go through fire, once they have been sharpened by fire, then this is where their transformation would now add value to them. It becomes great. And last but not least, we have the Kengshi. So the Kengshi, of course, represents yet another Fui Kong. So we do find that two Geng Metal Day Masters are the Fui Kongs. And this Kengshi will be the toughest and the hardest of the pillar. So it is a sword embedded. So sometimes we call them the radioactive axe, because inside the dots represents the internal clash between things, fire and the zinc metal. Oh yeah, really? So we do find that Arnold Schwarzenegger has lots of fire dominant, inborn in summer. So it's overwhelming. So it's very, very refined, very, very sharp into this. Kung metal also represents the lung. This also represents the lung. And so when kung metal is protruded, kung metal is protruded through the stem, they normally have a very loud voice. They can sing, they can shout, because their voice, they can carry their voice very, very loud. In the moment kung metal lack of fire, that denotes smoking, smoking. Because coal chart, because kung metal without fire is a cold chart. And when kung metal is cold, when the lungs are cold, the lung needs fire. And one way to manifest this fire is smoking. So smoking is the manifestation of the ting fire. But of course, smoking is quite the worst recommendation you could have. I mean, I don't think anyone should recommend another person to smoke in order to manifest the ting fire in the chart for the cold chart. But the draw is there. So if you see if you see kung metal protruded through the stems without fire, there's a tendency for them to, there's a greater affinity for them to smoke, for them to fill up their lungs with something warm into them. Therefore, they are more vulnerable to lung-related illnesses, especially smoking or vaping into them. Right. Therefore, that's where we can take a look into that. But of course, Arnold's chart is full of fire. This chart is definitely not cold. So therefore, that would be just a different reading. And so, Free Kongs are commander. Commanders are people who can enforce the system. Therefore, their roles are protector. They are the protector, the guardian, the law, and therefore they can also do excellent jobs in terms of being an auditor to uphold integrity, judges. In any form, they are here to uphold the law. If they can uphold the law, they can find professions or job in that particular line. Right, so with this, we come into the tail end of all this. And also, yep, I will also share with you the web in any case as well. Then you can also look at it. So I'll just share this later. All right, so this is all the time to share. I think it's quite a handful. You have this material on hand. So I think we'll just close up for the day, and I'll see you next week for the next one, which is a sim method. Okay, Piggy, thank you. All right, everyone. So if anything, we'll just communicate to the boss. Thank you very much. All right. Good night. Take care.